Okay, so look, welcome to this week's episode of Leaders on a Mission, where I'm joined by inspiring leaders driven by the impact of creating a healthy and sustainable world. And in today's episode, I'm joined by a pioneering entrepreneur, Jonathan Wolfson, CEO and co-founder of Ingenuity Foods, an innovative food-based brain nutrition brand. And look, Jonathan's a really experienced entrepreneur, CEO, board member, angel investor, a real founding pioneer of industrial biotech. Is commercialized a number of products and brands across industries, including personal care and health and food. And Jonathan, look, really appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks for taking the time today.
Well, Simon, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. Absolutely.
I remember very fondly our first meeting a few years ago back in Amsterdam. And, it's always been a pleasure having the opportunity of partnering with you over the years. So tell me, Jonathan, as you were, maybe I'll take things all the way back, right? From back to the early days. As you were kind of growing up, what were the, real, I suppose, major influences that helped kind of shape the ideas and aspirations of a young Jonathan Wolfson?
Yeah, I think like a lot of kids, I lived in a fictional universe for most of my childhood. I was a quintessential sci-fi fantasy geek for sure. I wrote my high school term paper on The Hobbit, actually. But so look, I remember reading lots and lots of Asimov, and wondering about a future on other planets. I was in my own brain, I was either flying actual jets or something more to the stars. It started in that kind of place of like the fantasy of what's possible, I think. As I got older, my family, we were fortunate. My family loved to spend time outside, whether it was camping or hiking, or my parents, they graciously afforded me the opportunity to really fall in love with the outdoors, which has been an astonishingly large part of my adult life when I'm not working or spending time with family. And that in turn really pushed me toward a very deep and abiding appreciation for how we had to take care of our environment, which has had a big impact on a lot of the things I've done since. There's a lot more to say, but that's kind of a little bit of that journey.
Got it. Okay. And what did your parents do?
My parents are it's given what I do now at Ingenuity with respect to the brain, it might not surprise you to know that my father is a neurologist, and my mother is a psychologist.
Right.
And yes, it was understanding how the brain worked, understanding how people think. Those were big parts of our house growing up, and they've also had a big impact on where I am today.
Got it. And I think you majored in law, right? I mean, I know you did law and an MBA, and
I did. I went to law school quite convinced that I wanted to be a lawyer.
Okay.
And I was fortunate that I spent time in law school. I went to NYU, and while I was in law school, I was fortunate to work at a company that was basically buying food companies at the time. And it was something of a buyout shop. And I got exposed there to both the law and the business sides. And I kind of liked what was going on the business side a bit more than the legal side, on at least there. So I went back to law school and I applied to get a joint degree. So I ended up getting at NYU a JD and an MBA while I was there.
Got it. Okay. And what was the JDA? What was the JD?
The JD is the graduate law degree, and then I also got an MBA.
Okay. All right. No, great. And at the time, so where did you decide? What did you decide to do after that? Well,
I think like a lot of people in their 20s, as much as I thought I had some glimmers of direction, I really cared deeply about the environment, and uh, I still bounced around a little bit. I spent some time living in the West on a Native American reservation doing legal aid. I worked at briefly at a large investment bank. So I did a few of those things, but ultimately a lot of it came back to a friendship and a series of discussions from college about how biotechnology could be used to solve some of the very big problems, including some of our planetary problems, and climate change being a big one. So what I ended up doing, more or less at a graduate school, with a couple other stops along the way, was to start an industrial biotechnology company focused first on renewable fuels and ultimately on a whole host of renewable high performing materials for food, for personal care, for all kinds of industrial applications, which is the company where you and I met.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just want to focus a little bit. I love the story of, it's infamous. You and Harrison, wasn't it, basically?
Yes.
These discussions, and then all of a sudden you're in the back of a garage and you founded a company. How long were you discussing things? And, I mean, how did it actually come about from discussion to actually get the company off the ground, actually?
Yeah, well, in interest of not boring your listeners or viewers to death, I kind of skipped over a lot of it. But look, it started when Harrison and I were probably 19, maybe 20, and the first serious discussions we had about it were on a camping trip in the Rockies in Colorado. And I will confess that a bottle of Jim Beam was probably a little bit of the fuel on the fire, proverbially. But we talked literally about how biotechnology could do things to change the world beyond pharmaceuticals, which obviously it's had an enormous impact. And that was when we were 20, and we both went to lots of grad school, as and eventually came together in our early 30s. I mean, I should say we talked about how and what it could look like over the course of more than a decade, but we came together in our early 30s in the Bay Area, and in fact in a garage in Palo Alto to start the company.
Got it. Okay. So you really had the opportunity of living your dream, basically.
Totally.
Oh, yeah, wicked. That's great to hear. And look, so you took this business right from this 10-year kind of discussion around how biotech can save the world and sort of reduce climate change. You took it right from that point, that idea, right through to an IPO, $200 million plus IPO over a 13-year period. Some journey, right? Some journey. And I suppose looking at it now, what when you reflect on it, how do you, the key learnings or takeaways for you, during that kind of period of your life, right? Which was a pretty sizable time period.
Surround yourself with realistic optimists.
Yeah.
And that's important. You need people who will be realistic, but you really want to be around people who are generally have a general disposition toward optimism, because when you're taking on really big problems, the number of little hills you'll have to scale along the way is legion. And if you don't have people around you who believe that the end is possible, it makes it a much tougher slog. So that's one of them. I think so. A lot of this is about people. At the end of the day, surround yourself with rational optimists. I don't want to be too crass, but you have to enforce a no assholes rule. Everybody knows the people who can bring down the environment, and even if they're the one person in the world who you think is the greatest at X, Y, or Z, when you bring toxic people into a workplace, it's really never going to pay off in a positive way. I mean, so a lot of it is about how you embrace people and how you really, I think I got better at it. I didn't start at it, but a phrase I didn't understand when I first started running companies was servant leader. And it's a phrase that I have a whole lot more robust respect for now. It's important to do everything you can uh, to help the people who work around you succeed. So I mean, look, it sounds platitudinous, but these are really a lot of the critical things that I learned along the way. I guess the other things are, if I went back and told you, you know, if how many different things we ended up doing that people told us couldn't be done,
Yeah.
that people were the experts in the field, everything from, how we ended up growing algae to make oils, to how we extracted oils, to whether or not you could make certain kinds of skincare products, to whether or not you could launch a consumer skincare brand from a biotechnology company, to whether or not you would be able to get FDA regulatory clearance on certain food things. I mean, the number of things that supposed experts said weren't possible that we ended up doing, there were a lot of them. Now, that does not mean that there were not plenty of failures and battle scars. Also, there were, and I'm not trying to gloss over, but I am saying clearly that you can't do this is often an invitation to demonstrate that something important is both doable and valuable.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That really is. And so have you always been a rational optimist then, do you think?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. And that's part of this also, particularly running companies that are very technical at times, is knowing how to really get to the heart of answers from people who know dramatically more about certain things than you do. I mean, we had big labs. We were creating an entirely new biotechnology platform in an organism that what we were pioneering, learning how to engineer the organism to do really incredible things. And it took a lot to figure out how to go to different members of the team and really get to the heart of what some of the issues were, and whether or not they were overcomable too. And so, yeah, you got to take optimism into that. And as I said, there were plenty of failures along the way. And if you let those failures get you down too hard, then you won't wake up the next morning ready to fight the next battle.
Yeah. Yes. But I would imagine, though, something I uh, observed, it was quite interesting with founding CEOs, especially when you've been from the garage and it goes all the way back. It's your baby, isn't it? Right? Does anyone care about it more than you do? Like, it's your life's kind of passion that's there, right? So, it's a real challenge kind of dealing with the ups and downs of it in a rational emotion, a way which isn't going to cause too much kind of mental health kind of issues, to be honest. It's, as a founder, I found that myself of a business, right?
Of course. I think, Simon, one of the things, I'm an advisor. I'm on a number of boards right now. I'm an advisor and an investor in, a couple dozen companies at least. And I think that everybody who starts a company knows, and if they don't know, then somebody needs to tell them early on, it's going to be a roller coaster. And you have to figure out how to ride a roller coaster like it's a marathon, because there are going to be days when you're convinced it's going to be the biggest success ever, other days where it just everything has gone wrong. And the bottom line is, if you let the highs affect you too high and the lows affect you too low, then this incredible distance that you need to cover won't really be coverable, because it'll wear you out long before you get there. So you need to know, first of all, everybody says, and this couldn't be more true, and it couldn't be more true if I've already been through I've started a number of companies. It's always harder and longer than you think it's going to be. And that's even after the last one was harder and longer than you think it was going to be.
Yeah.
So having the stamina and not getting too high or too low is a critical feature of it.
Yeah, no, got it. And I think the thing is as well, you played very much into like some of the brands that you brought to market, like the Algenist brand and the Thrive. It was this mix of the consumer, and then you had the B2B as well. And I know you've done both, but I've always just felt that you've loved the consumer, the brand side, the consumer side. That's the part. I don't know. I've got a sense that's always where your heart really was with this, basically, or is.
You know, I'd say yes, with a caveat, and the caveat is I love science. I love science, and figuring out a way to bring science to consumers is one of the coolest things around. When you can really bring a solution that does something better. I mean, I remember when, and you may remember this too. I remember when United Airlines flew the first ever commercial flight on an advanced biofuel, which was also, I believe, the first ever commercial flight on an advanced biofuel on our Solajet fuel. And the carbon footprint of that fuel was a dramatic reduction over, and it was a blend. To be fair, it was a blend with traditional jet fuel, but the greenhouse gas profile, the carbon footprint of our fuel was dramatically less. And, we got a chance to talk to people on the flight. We got a chance to hear from the pilots and other folks. And, you know, that is part of the rush of doing something that people feel, right? So that was technically on the ingredient side, but we got to hear from the end consumers, the people flying those flights. And, so to me, yes, I love consumer products, but part of it is getting to hear from end consumers is one, and you're more likely to get to hear from them when you sell a consumer product than if you sell an input. But for me, a lot of that joy is just seeing that you're doing something that's better or different. I got to tell you, I remember when we launched Algenist at Sephora in Paris, and some of the people who work there, they call them cast members, French, and were speaking to me, and my French is terrible, to be honest, but explaining how they had the product or they had gotten the products early before it was actually going into the store, and how much they loved it and how excited they were to tell their customers about it. And and then over the years getting to read the reviews. Now that's a blessing and a curse, right? Because yeah, granted, most of our reviews for those products were awesome, but not all of them were. And so you got to be able to take the good with the bad. The bottom line, though, to answer your question, is I do love consumer products because I love when you can do something that impacts people in a positive way. It's a rush. It doesn't get old to go into a store and see a product that was your idea. Well, it rarely, I mean, it always takes a whole lot of people to get a product on the shelf. But yeah, I mean, for a lot of these things, I know, look, that was my idea. It's pretty awesome, right?
Yeah, no, great. I remember having lunch with you as well just before you set up Ingenuity, actually, and I remember we were sharing some ideas. You were telling me about your ideas. And probably about 6 months before you set the business up. So tell me a little bit about the business and really in relation to the vision and the mission and the problem it solves.
Well, look, you know that one of the hard things at Solazyme, which was then TerraVia, was that a lot of our energy was to produce low carbon fuels. And as you remember, oil collapsed in 2014, went from the 80s per barrel to the frankly, it went to the teens in a matter of weeks. And at the time, we were selling some fuels to the airlines and to the two largest delivery companies in the U.S. who were using it in delivery trucks. And all of a sudden, what we were doing was completely non-competitive with petroleum in any way, shape, or form. And so we had built this very large facility in Brazil to make, well, not just fuels, a whole host of things, but that facility was dramatically underutilized. And we were able to, we were able to produce omega-3s for aquaculture, for very, very sustainable input to fish feed for farmed salmon. So I think the latest statistic, and I'm not positive this is right, but we launched a product called well, which one was it? Well, we launched a fish an aquaculture omega-3 product that is now in, I think, 25% of all global farmed salmon. But the point there is I learned a whole lot about omega-3s. And we got to meet lots and lots of nutritionists. And without getting into like the whole background, I left Terravia and knew that I was going to do something on the consumer side. My youngest child was born. My wife had some challenges with breastfeeding for a third child, and I went out and spoke to. We both did, but I went out and spoke to a host of pediatricians and neurologists and other folks who we had gotten to know, who basically all told me that our infant would be fine, that I should relax, that the formulas that were out there, the most important thing for infants, if they're not going to be breastfed, is that they get the right nutrients for brain and eye development. But the good news is that those nutrients are already out there in infant formulas, including omega-3s, which is one of the areas I knew the most about. And the next question was the hard one. What about your older kids? What do you mean my older kids? They're fine. Well, what do they eat? Unfortunately, they eat a fair number of, chicken fingers and pizza and, but we try to feed them well. Well, did you know their brains are still growing really, really rapidly, and they need a host of these nutrients that literally make up a lot of their brain? And I didn't. And as we dug in, it became clear that certainly American kids were getting something like 20% of the long chain omega-3s they needed. And it's one of the primary components of their brain. And they're only getting about 20% of what the World Health Organization recommends. And choline, which is a critical component of something some people may have heard of called acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is the main neurotransmitter in our bodies, which means it's what sends those electrical signals across in our brain and in our nerves, etc. And American kids were hugely deficient also in choline. So I mean, it became clear that there was an opportunity to do something for kids that would really have a big impact. And that's where Ingenuity was born. And along the way, while we haven't launched anything at this point, along the way, it's also become clear that there's a lot to do there around food-based brain nutrition for adults.
No, great. And that's great. It really is. And the first products that you've brought to market are aimed towards kids. So you've got a yogurt and you've got a snap pack out, and am I right in thinking that's two
yogurts? We've got fruit pouches focused on apple now. We have a couple of really interesting products coming out in January for kids as well. A couple of new ones that are shelf stable, and hopefully I'll be able to tell you about those real soon. Yes, so right now it's yogurts, and you can go into, in the US, you can go into a Whole Foods or many Walmarts and a host of other stores, and you can find the yogurts, and you can find the fruit pouches on Amazon, and now in a small but growing number of stores since we launched that one much more recently. Kids and parents appear to love them. And it's what my kids have one of our products pretty much every day, sometimes more. So, and the fact that they're not, because kids are pretty fickle, the fact they're not sick of the different flavors and products makes me happy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So how much of that Omega daily amount recommended daily amount, how much can they get through one of the products?
So let's take a DHA. A DHA and EPA are two of the long chain omega-3s. DHA is a large component of a child's brain, and based on the World Health Organization and in the U.S., the USDA and the CDC do a survey called "What We Eat in America." Based on that, American kids are getting, like I said, about 20% of the DHA EPA that they need. And with one single applesauce, for instance, well, with one single yogurt, they can go from 20% roughly to over 80% with just eating one yogurt, 4-ounce yogurt drink, or two 2-ounce yogurt tubes, from 20% to 80% in one shot. And they can go from, in the neighborhood of 2/3 of choline to 100% of what they need every day. So, I mean, the point here was not to pay lip service, but to really formulate these things to get kids where they need to be.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, it must have been a challenge mixing the ingredients with the taste profiles, for instance, and creating the formulation that's really going to appeal to kids.
Food science is a big part of it, Simon. Food science is a big part of it. The good news is my co-founder, Mark Brooks, has a very technical background, spent almost 2 decades at Cargill, and then worked with me at Solazyme and TerraVia, running that food ingredient business, which was a really technical business. And we, together with oils and omega-3s experience, have been able to, I think, do things that nobody's done before with respect to getting the right amounts in, making them taste good. In many cases, for some of the products, making them shelf stable, and making them have reasonable shelf lives. And so, yeah, that's been a very significant technical challenge, and it's part of our special sauce.
Yeah, no, great. But look, it's clear from outlining your why you set up Solazyme in the first place and this business, that for you it's really about that mission. You can really about bringing something, identifying a kind of gap out there that the kids have, a challenge with nutrition, and actually creating a solution that really solves that problem. And it's quite apparent that you really get your kicks and your enjoyment and your focus from solving those problems.
Yeah, I'm fortunate to have the opportunity to work with a lot of entrepreneurs, both as a director in a few companies, as an advisor in another few companies, and as an investor in a whole host more. And I got to tell you, as I get older and my hair gets more gray, I get so much pleasure out of the energy and the creativity of getting to work with all these entrepreneurs. I was pretty mono-focused for years at trying to get my own thing done. And I found that, man, it's awesome getting to work with a lot of folks and taking some of the lessons I've learned, some of them, with significant scars, and trying to help other people, but also really learning a lot. And hopefully that's going to help me as I continue to do things myself, but also in this kind of virtuous circle, working with lots of other entrepreneurs now.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, that's great. And I would say, kind of on reflection as well, thinking about some of the people that you would have hired over the years, some of the ex-Solazyme people that have gone on to lead companies in their own rights. And, I'd actually say it's about, the legacy is actually about really inspiring a whole new generation, really.
Oh, yeah. There's at least a half a dozen or more companies that are out there now. Some of them, maybe even more, some of them doing exceptionally well. That are alumni, people that we hired, and it's really, really fun to see that. I mean, they're doing it on their own merits with their own talent, but it does make me happy in some cases to still be close to some of these folks and see where and if I can be helpful. But no, I mean, look, that kind of energy. Look, I never thought I was going to be an entrepreneur. But it's a path I wouldn't trade for anything else.
Really? Okay. I was surprised you said that, because I've always just seen you as, having idea after idea after idea. I think the challenge is probably choosing the ones to go with, basically, right?
I think so, Simon. That's right. But a funny moment for me, I was in graduate school, And uh, I remember I did this project in graduate school. This dates me, I think, but this was in the early years of Amazon, but it was already getting a fair bit of exposure. This was in the 90s, and I wrote and presented a paper to one of my classes in business school about why Amazon should buy Barnes and Noble, which at the time was many, many, many multiples of size bigger, and I wrote this paper about how they were ultimately going to want bricks and mortar exposure, and how, ultimately, all the valuations at the time would ultimately, people would still care about earnings and things like that. And I'm not kidding you. I mean, when I say they laughed me out of the room, it was more polite than that. But it was about 40 or 50 people in this class, when the discussions came at the end and all the people told me that they could never buy a company like that, it would never work. What happened for me then is I looked at, shortly thereafter, um, when Steve Case did that merger with Time Warner for AOL. And look, many people have many different opinions about that. But to me, that's when I realized that creativity is not necessarily looking at Starry Night in the museum. That's a kind of creativity, and that's what I thought creativity was when I was a kid. I thought, and I was always a terrible artist. If you looked at my clay duck, it looked like more like a deformed snowman than a clay duck. And so I never thought I was creative. And then you see people like when Steve Case did this thing, and I realized, look, no, creativity comes in all shapes and sizes, and it can come in lots of different ways. It can come in business ideas, but I didn't get that early on. And I think when I was in graduate school, I started to realize that I was pretty creative, and that's really the point where I realized that maybe starting companies and being an entrepreneur was, something that had more potential.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, that's great. And maybe thinking about some of the people that we've spoken about that have gone on to do other things, and I mean, you've hired loads of people over the years, right? So, when you think back to those that have gone on to be successful and do really well, the really good hires you made, what did they have? What can you maybe synthesize it down to the key 3 or 4 things, or 2 or 3 things that they had maybe that others didn't?
An abiding an abiding need to speak truth to power. The people who were the most successful were the people who would always tell me when they thought I was wrong. The people who've gone on to be the most successful were the people who never hesitated to tell me when they thought I was wrong. So there was some level of either self-confidence or responsibility to the health of the organization that pushed them. I think, and I'm saying them, we're talking about different people, but one of those characteristics was an abiding need to speak truth to power, which I think is first of all, it's important for leaders to be able to hear it. So, but it's very important for people to be able to have the courage to do it. Another, I mean, look, you can say anything you want, but people need to have yes, there's a lot of value, and I'm a big believer that work-life balance is important, and it's very important to think through, how people are going to be able to run that marathon as opposed to a sprint. But I mean, one of the qualities also was a level of ambition that went along with a pretty tireless work ethic. Building things is hard, and it takes time, and you can't phone it in. So yeah, it's probably a tritism, but having real, I mean, not just ambition, but the willingness to sacrifice for that ambition, is another of these qualities. I think a third is just, a belief in general that things are possible.
Yeah,
Right? And this goes with that kind of realistic optimism. You have to believe that things are possible in order to really tackle, because like you see all kinds of people who have come out of business schools now and they've seen colleagues succeed at coming up with some new way to sell an old widget that is, and then they think, well, I'm smart, I can do that too. And what they don't realize is that the person that they're talking about who came up with that new way to sell that old widget deeply cared about that idea and invested themselves enormously. And when you just think, well, they did that, I can do this, it doesn't work like that. And we see that a fair amount when you see a lot of business plans and when you ultimately see what happens with companies. Yeah, it takes a lot more than being smart and seeing an opening. Intelligence to be kind of direct, intelligence is on some level a dime a dozen. It's about creativity. It's also about ethics. It's about creativity and it's about ethics. Anyway, I know I'm kind of ranting on this, but you get.
Oh, I think it's some really interesting thoughts around that, actually. And I suppose in light of that, when you're investing, I mean, you've mentioned you've invested and, you invest in lots of companies. Does that, when you choose to invest, what therefore are the top 2 or 3 things when you're looking at a company which make you decide yay as opposed to nay?
I mean, it's either I know the founder or I know the space. I either understand that either I know the founder or I have, if I don't know them, I have enough of a belief in them,
Yeah.
or I know the space. Now, if I know the founder and I believe in them, but I do think it's a crappy space, I still won't invest generally because, I mean, not to well, whatever. Warren Buffett, millions and millions of smart things have come out of that guy's mouth. But one of them is, you bring great managers to a bad business, and the business will win.
Yeah.
And so, but as a practical matter, I mean, it's about betting on people, and it's about making sure that they're pointing themselves in a rational direction. And I think, look, as you well know, every company is going to have there's going to be a bit of serpentine to finding the place that's going to really make a difference. But it's about betting on people that they're going to continue fighting until they find that spot. So I mean that's always the biggest. It's always the people is always the biggest, and then obviously really creative ideas where there's a defensible moat. But uh, it probably begins and ends at people
Yeah.
at the end of the day.
Yeah. That's great. Look, final question to the eternal optimist. Looking at the future for Ingenuity Foods, where are your dreams and hopes for this business?
Ingenuity, look, it's a private business, and so our goals are very much to be financially successful and to make our investors happy and to make the employees who are all owners happy. But it's also very much about doing something that we all care about. Like, I mean, almost everybody on the team has kids. Almost everybody on the team uh, um, is using their own kids as our guinea pigs. And I don't mean from a safety perspective, but I mean from a product perspective. This is about, look, 100 years ago, if you would have told somebody they needed to drink milk for their muscles and their bones, they probably would have told you they were crazy. And now we just take it on faith, right? Well, guess what? Our brains are the same way. Kids have rapidly developing brains, and those brains need certain nutrients, and most kids are not getting them, and we know what they are. And so yeah, it's a different message, but for me, the ability to provide parents and kids with relatively easy solutions, so that kids can reach their full potential, it's a very satisfying thing to get up for in the morning. And so I think the future, I hope we can impact a huge number of kids. We can help elevate the importance of brain nutrition for people way outside our own products, right? once upon a time we did a lot of that for algae, Mark and I, and now it's trying to elevate the idea that you need to eat for your brain. I mean, which makes sense. You're eating for your bones and your muscles and your organs and everything. You should be eating for your brain too. And I'll also say that as much as kids are really the initial motivation, there's a lot of things that I think we can do to help adults also, with respect to providing the right foods from a brain health and brain performance standpoint, as it relates to aging and as it relates to just healthy brain function. So, if we're thought of as the leaders in food-based brain nutrition a few years from now, I will be thrilled. And I think that there's absolutely no reason that we can't get there.
Sounds great. That sounds great. Well, look, I wish you all the very, very best, you, Mark, and the team on the journey. And it's been great to have you on today. Really enjoyed talking with you. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks, Simon. It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it.